One of the remarkable things about music, it allows us to have this generational appreciation for the presence of God, the beauty of God, having a journey with us. And when that's captured in song and music, it reminds us of this great God that has been with us for generations. If you're like me, there are certain generational ways that you remember the gift of God's love in your family with expressions of gratitude for the generosity of God being present. And for many of us, we had that joy of being a kid where we were doted on by a grandparent, and we were just the center of their world. And if it wasn't a grandparent, maybe it was an aunt or uncle or a neighbor. I just loved you and saw you for who you are. And for me, as I think about what it means to see generationally how God has been with my family, as I've shared with many of you, one of those great joys is being a grandparent. And so since August, my grandsons have been bringing me great joy. The twins, that's a photograph that was taken at 6 months old. February the 2nd, they turned 6 months old. And when I saw this image with this outstretched arm, it just reminded me of Jesus' love in my life. That Jesus has just opened his arms to me to experience his love and his joy. And as I look at how God has blessed the generations of my family, being able to see this is just a way to praise a great God that's with every one of us. So it is important that we remember generationally how God speaks through people and expresses his love and commitment to the world. This past week, I ran across this remarkable story of a generational way love was shared through indigenous people. Back in 2020, there were a group of women that created this GoFundMe page. It's a group of women that were Navajo and Hopi in descent. And what they wanted to do with this GoFundMe page was to support elders that lived in remote areas here in America. They didn't have access to food or to water on a regular basis. Within 6 months of the inception of this page, they noticed that over 20,000 people from Ireland had made donations. And it was curious to them, how did this come to be? Well, in this world that we live in, we're always like a Google search away for digital ways that people connect. So it turns out there was this Irish reporter that uncovered this story that happened in 1847. And in 1847, there was a tribe of indigenous people fresh off the horrific Trail of Tears, settling in the area we now know as Oklahoma. This particular tribe had heard about the potato famine devastating Ireland that diminished by 1/8 their population. And this tribe, settling in a reservation in Oklahoma, donated $170 to people in Ireland. That would be the equivalent of $6,000 today. And so when this English reporter heard about this, and he heard about the needs of indigenous people of the Navajo tribe and the Hopi tribe, they said, this is an opportunity to give back. And they gave the grand total of $670,000 as an expression of gratitude of how people in Ireland were remembered in their time of need and trouble. I share that story because it's an expression of the golden rule. And nestled in the scripture lesson that Jerome shared a moment ago was Jesus amplifying what all of us learn in grade school: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. World civilizations and world religions have embraced these teachings in different ways. And even for Jesus, it wasn't original to him. He wasn't the first person to say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus heard it first from Leviticus, where it teaches us to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So it's fitting today that we focus on the gift of the story of the golden rule, because you and I, we need encouragement. We need encouragement to see that as we give to this world, there are expressions of how God remembers our gifts from one generation to the next. And as an encouragement of how you and I see goodness in this world. The Bible gives us a guide, gives us direction on how we can experience goodness as we practice the golden rule. So from Luke chapter 6, from another translation known as the Message translation, here's how Jesus dials it in some practical ways that you and I can live the golden rule. Jesus says this: don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults because they chose to root for the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Unless, of course, you want the same treatment when your Broncos lose in the Super Bowl. Don't condemn those who are down. That hardness can boomerang. Be easy on people. You'll find life a lot easier. Give away your life, and you'll find life given back. But not merely given back with a bonus and a blessing. Giving, not getting, is the way. Generosity begets generosity. So what is Jesus teaching us? What's the takeaway that you and I have with this golden rule that so many of us were introduced at a very early age? Well, the takeaway for Christian community, for believers that want to trust Jesus to guide their lives, what Jesus is teaching here is a deliberate involvement principle. In order to practice doing good, we have to show up. We have to be present. We have to be giving. We have to be forgiving. We have to be loving. We have to be trusting. And when you and I start settling in the gift of what it means to be deliberate in how we are involved in the challenges of this world, there's a power and beauty of how you and I experience the goodness of God. We can feel in our souls and in our bodies, God just taking our hand and guiding us forward to experience the gift of goodness. Well, in the story of Trinity, there's a story of goodness that all of us benefit from. This story of goodness surrounds the legacy of a woman known as Clara Brown. She had this great trust in God and a deep devotion to Jesus Christ. In 1858, she obtains her freedom from a plantation in Kentucky. She learns that she has one daughter that lives out west, so she walks alongside of a wagon train to Denver. Because she was this freed 55-year-old woman, she wasn't permitted to be on the stagecoach, so she walked next to it to be here in Denver. She lands into this area, gets a job at a local bakery, has a log cabin, and starts to offer her generosity to community. And stories have been told about this woman with a willingness to open her home so that complete strangers would live with her. We're talking about homeless people living with a woman that was formerly enslaved. She would provide them meals because she understood what it meant to be without a meal. And she befriended Methodist ministers. And in August of 1859, Clara Brown was among those founding believers that created a church we now know as Trinity United Methodist Church. But let me share with you a little known fact about how this woman was able to experience God giving back to her life with a blessing that overflowed. Clara started a laundry business, and she had loyalty from the people that she had served and cared for in Denver that made their way to Gilpin County. In exchange for 50 cents and 2 pinches of gold dust, you could have your laundry cleaned by Clara. And what happened with this business of hers, she had these large cauldrons to wash their underwear and their shirts. And settling at the bottom of the cauldrons would be additional gold dust. You see where this golden rule is headed? Before the end of the Civil War, she had amassed $10,000, which is the equivalent today of $250,000. Now, folks, I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel here, but I highlight that the beauty and the gift of God's love and provision. If you're trying to follow Jesus and trust in his care, you would not be forgotten. God will always be there, blessing your life, opening up possibilities, and allowing you to see the beauty and the gift of his love and his care. And friends, when we have that experience of gratitude and generosity meeting in our soul, that's where joy comes alive. So for the past 6 weeks or so, we've been talking about the beauty and the gift of joy under the tutelage of the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu. And Archbishop Tutu made this statement in the book on joy, where he says this: we are fundamentally good. The aberration is not the good person, the aberration is a bad person. We are made for goodness. And when we get opportunities, we mostly respond with generosity. We are deeply rooted to be generous. Studies even show that if you practice a higher sense of purpose, if you decide to be generous with your time and your talent and your treasure, that the likelihood of you dying is reduced by 23%. That age that you live longer by being generous and giving. And so what Jesus reminds us in this golden rule is that you and I can make a choice to practice goodness. And what does it look like for you to practice that golden rule today? How does the golden rule inform you to honor a commitment? How does it remind you to keep your word? How does honoring the golden rule help you serve Jesus and do what you can when God is asking you to do something that may be miraculous? My final example of the goodness of God today is to give you an update on something that happened in June 2023. In June 2023, we made an application with the IRS to receive what's known as an employee's retention credit. And along the way, we've been watching and waiting and hoping that God would bless us to open this opportunity, to have this runway of cash infusion so we can see the future more clearly. And thanks be to God, I'm able to report you today, over the past 10 days, we have received $171,000 that honors like a prayer that we've had. And in the midst of waiting for those dollars, so many of you showed up with additional generosity, just kind of creating a bridge to the future. And while there were incredible leaders on our finance team and on our staff that really worked hard to secure this transaction, let me highlight the goodness of one person that made a tremendous difference. Her name is Jan Shellhammer. I don't see her in worship today, otherwise she would chastise me for telling this story. But Jan serves on our staff parish relations committee. And she shared with me that she was a government employee for all of her career. And to kind of make that personal for us today, she was one of those employees that today we're reading about that are concerned about the security of their job. And what Jan learned as an employee of the government is the power and the gift of tenacity. And so what Jan did without anyone urging her or making her or expecting her to do this, she established a relationship with Diana DeGette's office, our congressperson that represents us. A person on Diana DeGette's staff was assigned to be in correspondence with Jan, and she kept month after month for over a year and a half pleading the case of Trinity's submission for these dollars. But more importantly for Jan, this was an expression of how good that God has been in her life. And she had just shared to me once that how God had blessed her so much. Trinity has been a community of blessing in her life for so many years. She could not imagine not sharing her gifts and her talent in order to help us in our time of need. She kept her word. She honored a commitment. And she helped to create for you and for me and for this church a runway for the future. Generosity begets generosity. So what I want to do now is invite you to respond to the generous way that Jan offered her time and her talent with an invitation. Desiree Gold is going to sing a song for us in just a moment that speaks to the beauty and the power of what it means for us to experience love in this world. And you have on your pew rack a card. This is our estimate of giving card. Some of you have had an opportunity to respond, and we thank you for your generosity. We also realize there's some people that never respond, but yet they give generously to the church, so we thank you for your giving. And still for others that are new to Trinity, or maybe you just haven't had a chance to respond, we just want you to fill out how you can be committed to the generosity that allows us to share this generational story of Jesus' love. You and I are stewards of Clara Brown's story, but we're also stewards of our own family stories. When someone introduced you to Jesus, like my Aunt Hattie I talked about a couple of weeks ago, are you experiencing Vacation Bible School? Are you in a youth group? Are you surrounded by worshipers experiencing music in church? It was because someone chose to be generous. So as she's sharing this song with us, there's a basket up front. And lyrically, as you receive the song and you process it, some of you will be nudged to come down and drop your cards off. We're grateful that at this church and in your heart, that gratitude and generosity are the same coin. It's the goodness of God in your life. It's the love of Jesus to guide you forward. So receive the song, and again, fill out the card, bring it to the basket, and we appreciate your generosity.